Good morning, friends. And we have a very interesting morning for you, morning awaiting you. May I introduce Jenny Dowling, who is going to speak to us on seafaring matters.
Over to you, Johnny.
Well, thank you for inviting me to the meeting today. It's a pleasure to be here. I will try to not talk too long or too much, which is a hardship for me. It's always good to be able to present these kind of things to different groups and different people to see them. Seafaring at the moment with COVID, etc., is a very, for want of a better pun, very fluid at the moment. Only this morning, one of my meetings was interrupted by another ship. We got a text through to say they're being abandoned in Mombasa. Now, when a ship is officially abandoned, that's probably about 3 months they've been there with no pay and no connection from their owners. So generally in that situation, luckily there was 3 of us in the meeting and 3 of us that can get stuff done quite quickly. So just in one meeting about something else, we're able to send them some food and water to get the basics sorted before we even start on the rest of the process. It's always a worry when these things happen. I'll mention abandonment in my talk as I go along. So depending on everyone's internet strength, I mean, I'll share my screen. I've got a short video, which is an introduction to the mission. It's a very basic one, but it does give you a minute and a half of good introduction. And then I'll talk about our actual work as it goes ahead and what we do on a day-to-day basis and what seafarers do, obviously, as well. So, assuming you can see my screen.
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I've titled this, obviously, We Need Seafarers and They Need Us, which is a rather basic way, but it is the simple fact of the matter. So I've left it as that. So I'll start with a quick video for you. If there's any issues with the sound, please do just let me know. Sometimes they can buffer a little bit. So.
For more than 160 years, the Mission to Seafarers has been working tirelessly to promote the health, safety and well-being of seafarers and their families. Today, we're one of the world's largest port welfare charities, serving seafarers in more than 200 ports across 50 countries. With over 90% of our goods and fuels transported by sea, so much of our prosperity depends on merchant shipping. And the men and women who keep this vital sector running need to know, when they are out at sea and far away from home, that somebody is looking out for them. They need to feel seen, heard, and understood. At the heart of our work is our ship visiting program. Our network of chaplains and volunteers make over 60,000 ship visits each year. This gives seafarers the chance to talk about their mental health, any concerns they have about life at home, and to access free communication with their loved ones. And for crew at sea, we provide digital chaplaincy services, available to seafarers 24/7, wherever they and their families are. Life at sea can be challenging. Seafarers spend months away from their family, and during their time away, face the real risks of piracy, the trauma of abandonment, and even shipwreck. At the Mission, we're dedicated to advocating for seafarers around the world, offering support and practical assistance wherever we're needed. And when they are in port, our Flying Angel Seafarers Centres are there to help crews relax. They can call or email their families, play games, enjoy home comforts, and buy supplies. Over 400,000 visit our centres each year. We know that it's not just seafarers who face hardships. That's why we work to support seafarers' families back home as well, through our local family support networks and educational programs like We Care. Welfare, support, assistance, care. Whatever the situation, the Mission to Seafarers is here to look out for some of the world's most invisible workers.
Now, if you bear with me for 1 second, I'm going to try and see you, but I can't see you at the moment. That's because of my sharing. So I'll close that for a second. Yeah, unfortunately, you get me again. I do have further slides. Some of our work. That video, quite a basic one to show sort of why people need seafarers. And I think, as you say, it's sort of 90% of everything we use will travel to us via the sea. Simple as that, whether it's fuels or anything. It's been an eye-opener over the past couple of years. COVID has been a very big eye-opener, we've noticed, where people will discuss lorry drivers as they're very important and there's a lorry driver shortage, etc. And yet the seafarers who bring the items to us that the lorry drivers are picking up have still not been mentioned. And they have been routinely left out again. We had a message yesterday where a chap was over the moon. He's celebrating his first shore leave in 2 years. Now, when I say shore leave, I don't mean he's going home. He's stepping foot off of his vessel for the first time in 2 years. It has been a horrendous situation for these guys. Some of the ports have completely shut the options. Our centers shut down. We had to reimagine our entire delivery process. I get text messages from people who are saying that they've got they're desperate for safety shoes. So, for instance, you're still working on board, but your safety shoes are wearing out and going because they're not, they were supposed to be able to pick new things up. So what we've now found is that we're having to go shopping for seafarers to buy their safety shoes because health and safety has said they have to wear their shoes, but health and safety has also said they're not allowed off the ship to go shopping. So all the stuff they brought to us to stock up our supermarket shelves, they cannot access. So we're buying it for them. Our mental health work is at the end of a gangplank in some cases, which in some ports wouldn't necessarily be so bad. If you think of some of the more northern ports, it's not the best of places to try and have a discussion. At Grangemouth, for instance, it's nigh on impossible to talk to somebody. Huge petroleum area, there's added security as well. So we've had an awful lot of day-to-day changes, but our work has had to carry on. I think our figures from 2020, we still managed over 30,000, I'm looking at my figures now, over 30,000 socially distanced visits to crew. And some of that we had to fight through port security to get to, not physically, but we had to actually make a huge case for this because they were not allowing us to go anywhere nearby. We spent an awful lot of money on PPE gear. In some ports, you've got to wear it anyway because of the petroleum stuff. Obviously, you've got to wear masks at the best of times. So we've been pushing and pushing hard for all of these guys. And then the Ever Given. Anyone aware of the Ever Given blocking the Suez Canal? Yeah. People noticed that one all of a sudden. Do you know how big the ship was? It was heavily reported. It's 400 meters long or whatever. It had about 18,000 containers, I think it was. And it was valued at, or the goods on board were $700 and something million. And there were reports everywhere about it. Not one of them mentioned how many crew were on board. Bear in mind the crew, by the way, just going to point this out, they're not the ones who got the ship stuck. In the Suez, you're not allowed to have your own ship go through it. They have a pilot that does it for you. But everyone was mentioning how much was on board, how much it was costing. I think the global economy was something $400 million an hour. It was costing the global economy they were going on about. Still no one mentioned the guys that were involved on that ship. There were 26 Indian seafarers on board that ship. No one talked about them. Then when the ship was released, it wasn't released, it was moved off of its grounding. Egypt then refused to let it go because they were demanding compensation. So that crew then spent 3 months locked on board because their ship had been arrested by the Egyptian authorities over money. And I think eventually Egypt, No one knows exactly how much, but they were paid out about $500 million. And then the ship was let go. But still, the crew weren't mentioned at any point in that. And we were visiting them. We were, obviously, when I say not weren't mentioned, in the maritime sector, we were pushing it. In the sort of trade press, a few were doing it. But in the main presses, if you looked at the BBC site, no one was talking about the actual people involved or their families at home, because these guys weren't being paid. Their families are still sitting at home, and there's 3 months extra on your, regardless of COVID. It's about people. And so where we push for our real work is about those seafarers. The goods are great, it's fine. But if 26 people were in charge of the safety of $770 odd million worth of goods, you think the people might be treated a little bit better. The best of times, some of these guys are getting about 100 megabytes, I think it is, of internet time. That costs them $25 they're charged for. Now, 100 megabytes in real terms is, well, we've already gone over that in this video call. You get an average quality call of about 8 minutes you'll get for that. And that's costing the actual crew $25. Even some of the better ones give them 250 megabytes as their monthly allocation. Yeah, this is your only calls home. That's nothing. Especially with the COVID times or being arrested and for 3 months, etc. So we've had to really change the kind of way we work, and we've developed different tech. We've got mobile Wi-Fi units. We'll just drop them on the ship or drop them nearby, and they can all connect to it. Because a port doesn't have Wi-Fi. A port doesn't have a setup specifically for the seafarers for every part. They do try, but some of these ports are vast. You're not able to do it. So we've bought these kind of units in so they can contact home. They can download these courses. We provide mental health courses free to the seafarers. So they can actually download that for free and use it when they're on board. So we do as much of that as we can. If I share my screen again, I'll do my best to try and get it right this time. How's that looking? You can see my screen again?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got a lot of cases there where we were transporting. This is just in 2020, by the way. So this is during the biggest lockdown. We still managed to transport about 46,000 seafarers. Now, the reason for that is that the ones who were getting any time off or shore leave, the issue being that you're about 15 to 20 minutes away from where anything is. So we have to pick them up and bring them to either a centre or to the local shops. If you look at, I use Grangemouth as a great example. The point that they let off the ship is about a 20-minute walk if you know the direction you're going in to get to our centre, which is the first piece of actual place you can buy something. You can get, chocolate bars or drinks or those kind of things. These 30,000 ship visits here, that's a lot of seafarers. We generally get to a gangplank in these current COVID times, and then people just appear, and you'll get one after the other after the other. And they want to talk about anything. I had an hour-long conversation pre-COVID about one chap who was looking at his wedding. They're planning his wedding. And that's all he wanted to talk about, which was lovely. It was fantastic to be able to talk about a different subject. But everyone on board, unfortunately, was bored of hearing about his wedding because there's only 20 guys on board and there was nobody left who he hadn't told about it. So it was just a fresh face. And we had a very similar sort of wedding because I had been, obviously, his wedding coming up was much the same as my wedding, with lots of huge family. Dowling is a huge Irish surname, so there was always lots of family involved in mine. And he had a lot as well. So it's talking about something different to somebody. We have chaplains, we have ship visitors. Generally, what the guys want to see is somebody else's face. Unfortunately, this isn't always the nicest one you have to look at when you get to no one wants this after 40 days at sea. But they want to talk about things. They want to know what's going on. They want to know what's in the local area. There is just a bit of humanity is what they want, because all their shore leave or their 4 hours off their shift is about filling in their paperwork from the shift they've just finished. The more and more paperwork that's put on them is the more and more they're doing now. And as the crews get smaller, the paperwork goes the other way. So I work with a lot of guys that, again, a lot of our ship visitors are ex-mariners themselves. And again, they're looking at it saying, well, hang on, it's a vastly different world they're living in, where you don't have that massive crew you could work with or you build a relationship with, and now your paperwork is through the roof. Bearing in mind that also uses up some of your broadband, where you're having to email off your forms, etc. So there's a huge change in how this is. And we've been just looking at how we can support those seafarers to do their job, but also what, their life as well at home. So we've adapted a lot of our minibuses now. America, Australia have done it. We've got a few here where we've made them into mobile vaccination centers, because the seafarers still, after all of this going on, we've managed to get them up to 22% of the global seafaring population have been vaccinated now, which sounds not too bad. However, last month it was only 15%. So there has been a huge jump up in this, because people are changing centres where the governments are saying, fine, they can't go anywhere, but they'll adapt one of our centres or one of the other charity centres or a buses, whatever we can do, we'll do it. There have been some pretty terrible cases in Rotterdam, where unfortunately a pilot came on to pilot the ship for them, but he hadn't realised he was carrying COVID. And these guys had no antibodies whatsoever, because they had not stepped off for 18 months. And 2 of them died very, very quickly. It was a very hard hit. One chap was in hospital. He's been released now. Unknown. There's people, with all the testing that's going on, everyone tries it, but these things still happen. So we have to find a way of vaccinating them, and these kind of cases are doing it. So these are just day-to-day things we're doing now. We never would have, you'd asked me 2 years ago, it's not something we do. We might drive someone to the hospital or to a medical appointment. We're now picking up medication for people, because if you're going on a 12-month voyage, you don't bring your epilepsy medication. You don't bring all of these extra spares. And even if you did need it on your shore leave, you'll go and pick it up. So we're finding that that's how we're looking at it, is what do the people need and how do we go from there? We have a seafarer happiness index, which guides all of our work. We don't come up with plans of what we can do. We ask the seafarers what we can do. We're constantly asked in Greece. I haven't got a port in Greece, so I cover the whole of Europe, but we're not based in Greece. And I'm constantly asked by the Greek market, why aren't you here? Well, we don't need to be. The Greek seafarers are looked after quite well when they're at home. So we'll spend the money on the ports that they're going to where they're not looked after. We don't spend money where it's, it'd be good to be there. Well, it might be good to be there, but we're not actually needed there. So we'll move on. We're a very lean charity, which COVID has shown us. There's 22 of us at head office. It's 50 countries, 200 and whatever ports we're in, and it's run by 22 people and an army of volunteers. But it's worked quite well. We've done really well with it. But it's about those seafarers and how we can work on, like, the abandonment cases. The MT Iber is one that was quite recent, even made mainstream press, which was again surprising for us. 4 years these guys have been abandoned, 4 long years in the UAE, and we were feeding them, trying to get them repatriated. They were stuck on board that ship, and not just that, but a rather dodgy shipping agent got a new seafarer a job, dropped him off at the bottom of the ladder and left him. And that chap realized when he climbed up that the crew had already been on for 2 years. So this shipping agent knew full well that he was just sending this guy to a prison on the UAE. And you can't leave, because if you abandon the ship, you'll end up in prison. And you've also got no documentation, because that rather dodgy shipping agent has kept all of your passports, so they are physically trapped. And fortunately, there was a storm and the anchors broke. I find myself doing this a lot now when I mention the anchors breaking, because the ship was then washed up on one of the poshest beaches in the area. And as soon as the rich people had to see it, the ship was sorted and the crew were repatriated within 4 weeks. That's 4 years of no one seeing them. And then 4 weeks of them being on the end of a beach, and the crew were repatriated. We had been fighting for that for 4 years, feeding them. The owners will not send them food. There's no air conditioning. It's 50 degrees. All of these things, you're sitting in a steel box in 50 degrees is really harsh. And we had about 1,400 of those kind of cases that we'll deal with on different bases. Some resolve within 2 weeks, but those guys will not be paid their contract. Their family are at home waiting for them to come back after a year-long contract, and they've got no salary. So we fight for their salary as well. So the ship in the UAE, for instance, was sold off, and the money from that went to the crew's wages. However, it still only paid 70% of the money they're owed. But 70% is better than nothing. In those cases, your family has borrowed money to stay behind. So we push as much as we can from a seafarer's point of view. Not all ship owners are like that, obviously. We have many ship owners who basically buy into our mental health training program, because it's all well and good. They'll offer all these different things, but you need to be resilient in yourself and know how to deal with your own things. So we offer that to all of the seafarers for free. They will know how to deal with their own mental health, how to look after themselves, how to exercise properly and things like that. And we keep it on that personal level. Corporate stuff is fantastic, but if you look after that seafarer, eventually it will filter through to the top end. And some of the better owners are seeing that now. They really are pushing. We had an awful lot at London International Shipping Week, and their first thing is the seafarers. Now, that might be because as these guys are ending their contract, between 5 and 15% of the officer classes are starting to not renew their contracts. They've had enough. After COVID, they've had enough. That will have a huge impact. People think lorry drivers not being around was harsh. If that many of them start saying they're not coming back on board, there will be a huge skills gap plus a huge backlog of everything else. I think we're still talking about containers being in shortage. You'd have to worry about containers being in shortage if the officer class stopped coming back again. So that's sort of a roundabout way of what we do. We work with their families. We educate the families at home. We've been doing a feeding program, which is very rare for us. But because, especially in India, if you can't finish your contract, you're not getting paid. The guys that are waiting for you to finish a contract are not being paid. So we've had to feed 3,500 families, I think we're up to at the moment, just because someone can't end their contract and someone can't start their contract. In the Philippines and now India as well, we're training families on budgeting, on appropriate use of social media, because as much as it can be great, it can also be a force for quite bad. Receiving good news on social media can actually have a real issue. If you're away and your child is born whilst you're away, that's great news. Unfortunately, you're stuck on a ship 2,000 miles away. And we've seen cases of suicides going through the roof. We're looking at it's about 5 times higher now than it is on shore-based jobs. And it's getting, COVID has only made that worse. We had one chap who luckily is home now, arranged his entire voyage around getting home for the birth of his first child. He was due to finish in the April. She was going to be born, I think it was the end of May, beginning of June. And then COVID hit, and that was it. He didn't see her till she was 6 months old, I think it was last year. So he got home, likely, nice time for Christmas, etc. But it just ruined all of the plans, and he had no choice because there was nothing you could do. A lot of chaps from Philippines were repatriated, managed to get home, but then they were left on board a ship in the port because Manila was not ready to take anybody in. There was no vaccination program then. So they were technically home, but they weren't able to go home and see their families. So it's a difficult situation, but COVID is just one of the small things. It's just shown to other people how bad it is. All of these issues of connectivity, long shifts, suicide, poor management have been in shipping since we started, which is 180 years, I think now. Started in Bristol, obviously, 180 years ago. But it's still they're getting worse in some cases, and in other cases they are starting to get better, but we're there to keep on supporting the seafarers and make things better in 10 years time, 20 years time. Okay, that's basically what we do. We listen to seafarers and we fix as best we can what issues they have. We don't put sticky plasters. Our work on the mental health crisis, we train seafarers to help themselves. We train cadets to be mental health first aiders. They're not going to be on board ships for another 10 years. You know, we got guys going into the academies now that we're trying to train, and we're trying to fix these problems before they arise so they can be more used to their shipmates in the future. It's almost working ourselves out of a job, but that's fine. We'll always find something else to do. But that's basically where we are. So I've spoken enough. I've told you I was going to speak too much. I apologize. But if anyone has any questions, I might be able to answer them. Yes, right.
Could you speak for a few minutes on the thorny issue of the registration of ships?
You mean the flag registration?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. That's
why I said it's a thorny issue.
Yeah. It's not my full remit on that. Ben is one of the best ones to do on that. Flagging of vessels is changing again, as you've seen in the latest budget kind of things as well. The flags of convenience are a continuing issue. Basically, with the flagging of ships, obviously depending on how much everyone knows, is that people are flagging for taking a flag of a ship that doesn't really follow all the rules. You have to follow certain things. That is changing though, Ray. It's a thorny issue, but it's also one that's changing. Seafarers are now developing more power behind them. The unions are still pretty divided on this, but seafarers are starting to vote with their feet. Where if you are flagged to a state that's known for just not caring, seafarers are not taking up the contracts. And that started just before COVID, because you know full well that it's going to cause an issue. Australia are huge on this, and that it does hit mainstream press. It's not my biggest remit, so I can get some stuff to you. I might have to follow up because there is a whole load of work that gets done in our advocacy team on this, and it is a huge part of our work. But we, working with some of the other companies because we work with all the charities, all the other seafarer charities, we are seeing seafarers saying, actually, no, like the UAE issue. Even the UAE is now standing up saying, we don't want to be known as somewhere where people are just dumping ships that they don't want anymore. One, it's a danger to them. That's their main thing. And two, it affects their money coming in. The flags coming through is a big change. And yeah, it's not my hot point, but I will get some stuff to you because there is a lot of information on what's happening and how we work on it. But seafarers are better informed now. And well, with people leaving, this will only be a change again. And the powers that be, say, for instance, Australia being a good one, you're not coming in. They'll happily stop people coming in. And so the shipping has to change in what it's going for.
Yeah, the main one which one would hear about in the news and places like that is Panama.
Yeah, we're based in Panama now. Yeah, that's we once again, it's one of those things of, is there an issue? Is there somewhere we need to go? And we are based there. Ian is there and fighting we talk about not being welcome in certain places. We're not welcome in certain places, but we still go there. And we can still fight the issue. I mean, you know, Ian he's tired, I think, because he's been there 2 years now. But it is part of a bigger plan that we have, and the flagging of something and the rules around it and the shining a light on it. It was the good start. You don't want to be doing this. And the seafarers natter. They natter a lot, and now they're actually being able to say to somebody, I don't want this. When they report a flag or they report a ship owner, they are still worried about the blacklisting that occurs.
Of course.
But what's also happening is they're realizing they're getting blacklisted oh, well, you won't be able to work with this one. Well, why would I want to? Yeah, and this is it. Oh no, I might be blacklisted from a firm that will dump me in the Middle East with no payment for how long, or they're holding back the wages, which again, there's been a huge one. Australia is very hot on that as well. They will come on, right, show us your books, show us everything, and they are constantly finding stuff. They're suddenly becoming a port, or all of their ports are becoming unwelcome places if you are not fully up to date. And they really have gone very Australian about it, to be honest. But also we're based there, so they know if there is an issue, they have to arrest the shipping, the crew is looked after. So they've looked at it from the crew point of view. And we had this huge, I think just at the beginning of COVID, one of the cruise ships was caught there. And the whole town came out to look after the crew that were on board. And when they left, they had this massive, I went down 4 floors of the cruise ship saying thank you to the whole town. And it was this huge thing and everyone came together. But the ports for the taking wages or the not repatriating or the extending of the contracts, they will go in and say, give us all your paperwork very quickly. So yeah, but it's a bigger issue that I can get some further information. If you send me through your email address, I'll get you some more news on those kind of things from a worldwide point of view.
Okay.
Sorry.
No. That was very comprehensive. And, any more friends?
Hattie, you got your hand up?
Hattie.
Hello. Johnny, I'm very sorry that I couldn't join earlier. Too many mental health crises happening around me. Anyway, thank you so much for an extremely full and comprehensive talk. My goodness, I'm amazed. I used to be a GP, so of course I think to myself, how can you take a year's worth of medicine abroad with you? Because the law says that the NHS can give you 3 months' supply, otherwise you have to buy it privately. I mean, I understand this is for their job, it's not just for a holiday or a little trip. So how did you go about that? And is there an arrangement that the NHS does make with them?
No, we've found here some of the major problems we've had have been European-wide rather than here. We had to actually, they were very good in the end. We had to pick up HIV medication for one of the seafarers, but he couldn't go and pick it up himself, which was what he would normally do, bring all of his ID and go and pick it up elsewhere. So we managed to get it all for him. You're finding that most guys will book it in advance if they need it. So you've got your private kind of stuff. There is a big difference between British seafarers and the rest of the world. I'll be brutally honest with you on that one. It's quite an easy one. They have far more access to everything they need. The Filipino seafarers, the Indian seafarers, and the African seafarers who are non-officer based, not non-officer based, there's a fair few now, are the ones that really struggle with it because they can't necessarily access here. Seafarers before the pandemic, because your longest voyage is about 45 days, you could plan it out so you could access and pick up your medication here after 3 months. Most of them have the idea of bringing that on board is fine, but no one planned for a year. Certainly no one planned for the 18 months, and no one ever, even at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't think there'd be anybody waiting 2 years to step off a ship. So generally beforehand, it's a case of planning. You know your route, and they will just happily do it. There's a little app on your phone, which is marine traffic. It tells them when they're going to be in a port, what's in the port, and who they can contact. And so a lot of the time we're driving them to pick up prescriptions. We're driving them to pick up, we'll do a day trip to the bus into town. So the thing that changed with it was the lack of planning. Seafarers can plan. They know how to plan for when they're in port for 3 days. That's a 3-day plan. Shore leave is restricted before COVID. They've got an 8-hour shore leave. They can plan that 8 hours out and it's a full event, and they still manage to get in sightseeing in some cases as well. So what changed was the access to it. In the UK now for COVID, we have had some setups in our ports where the local NHS staff have got involved in that. In others, we're driving seafarers to where they can get vaccinated because it's just not suitable to, or it's just not sustainable to have something set up in a port. You might see 20 people. There is no point in that at all. So it's a bit of a mismatch, or a mix and match with whatever works. But what it was before COVID was about planning and pre-planning everything. And that's how they would do it. I know I can pick it up from the US. I know I can pick it up from UK. And that's where it's gone. It's got to be said, the vaccine as well has had its issues. My son, for instance, he had the AstraZeneca vaccine here. His girlfriend is American. And then he was told, oh, hang on, there's a batch issue. I can't remember which one it was. Couldn't go because of this, that, and the other. What the seafarers all wanted was, I think it was the Johnson & Johnson one at first, because that was the most widely accepted one. Yeah. And then they just wanted whatever. But the problem being, they didn't now, what you'd normally have is, I'm going to be here and get my next one 8 weeks later. In normal shipping terms, you know where you are 8 weeks later. In COVID times, they're literally not sure where they're going to be again. And so that second jab has been the big issue. But being up to 22% of being double vaccinated is a huge jump. And that's only because people suddenly realized they had to do it. America's been very good on that. The European countries been very good on that as well. A massive centre in Rotterdam. Again, really pushing everything there.
Harry.
I have spent 10 days on a cargo boat sailing from Gaul to 4 ports in Sweden. And it really is so educative to see their life. The fact they work extremely hard in ghastly conditions. They can't necessarily understand each other. But I wondered if John could talk very briefly about abandonment, piracy, and cruise ships.
Those three don't always go together, but we're going to we'll try that one. The abandonment cases are harsh because we don't know how long it's going to take. Most of our cases can be done quite quickly, but bearing in mind we can't get involved until after a period of time when they're legally abandoned. That's when they have to notify somebody. Say some of the 4-year cases they're rarities to get that long, but even a year or 2 years is too long. We're having to feed these guys a lot of the time. They don't have water. We had cases of where chaps were, the air conditioning was working from a diesel generator and they were using the water generated out of the air conditioning as part of their drinking water. And so, these kind of things are constant. The good shipping owners are very good at saying, well, actually, we would never do this, and they wouldn't do it. But also in some cases, some of them saying, well, it's not our problem. Because they don't want to use their money to offset other ship owners that have just undercut them and dealt with it. But we do have, the ports now are very quick to say, right, this is what you need to do. And they get us involved as quick as they can. They help us get out to the ships, for instance. They're really keen on doing it. Because again, there's a great deal they can't do. Is why the UAE are trying to change some of their laws around the abandonment to mean it's worked quicker. That's the idea. We need to react as quickly as we can. If they've been abandoned, you've got a terminology of it. You don't need to wait 4 years to actually get round to sorting the ship out. What you need to do is get on and deal with it straight away, which is what people are trying to do. That's getting better in that. I think, again, back to embarrassment cases, really. If it happens too much, it doesn't look good on a port, and so they're forced to actually do something about it. We give as much publicity as we can to these ones that go that way, and shamelessly we'll say the name of the owners as many times as we possibly can, especially if they've shut down and set up a new business somewhere else. Now trading as, or whatever, you can put it in, so that the seafarers are made aware of that and the ports are made aware of it. So it is happening. More companies, I just had a meeting this morning. There's a big US company, and they're not directly involved in shipping. They give supplies, and what they're saying now is, well, when you've got a ship that's been abandoned, you let us know, and we'll do the part of bringing the supplies to your guys to actually do it. rather than us spending $1,000, $2,000 on the supplies they're going to need, the basics of the water and the food, etc. They'll bring that to the port and we'll get it out to the ship, which is a great way of doing it, because it also will then start showing to the shipping community, hang on, we don't even own ships and we're trying to sort this kind of thing out. But it is a constant battle, the advocacy stuff. All of our work, not all of our work, but a big chunk of our work in the UAE. So you've got Andy Bauman is our regional director there. He is quite simply the main expert we have on abandonment, because that's where most of it happens. Unfortunately, his patch is huge. So we had all the UAE, we had one in Mombasa. Well, we got the Mombasa now. We had Mumbai a couple of years ago, which was only finished. That took 3 years to fix. But it's a case of absolutely getting together with everybody and doing it. Our relationships with the shipping community are huge, and we make sure, because it's a people-based business, you need to get everybody on board. So say the meeting this morning, we got a text message about an abandonment. We can meet, we can get the essentials there. Ben Bailey, who's our head of advocacy, will go off now. He had a meeting, like he finished ours, and at 9:30 was on a phone call. There's about 5 people there. We'll get the whole ball rolling. What needs to change is the legal process of it, which again, we're involved in fixing those kind of things, but it's all slow process. But we don't want to fix anything now for a short term. What we want to do is fix it in the longer term and make sure it's sustainable. Piracy is, well, there was a slight lull. It was reported only yesterday, I think, the slight lull in piracy, which it's very easy to point that where that's been from in 2020. There's, you know, it's not that anyone's done anything right, as there's been a worldwide pandemic. It's not, but there's been some changes in piracy lately. I think the last big attack where the crew all went, obviously quite rightly, we were off into our citadel. The pirates had come with explosives and blown their way in and kidnapped the entire crew. And it's the whole Turkish crew, where normally you're safe hiding away. They can't get in there. I mean, but these guys came specifically to do that. They were released quite quickly. The Turkish dealt with that quite quickly, to be honest. But it is still just money. As long as there's a money-making scheme, people will find a way of making money. And if they're being paid out $100,000, $200,000, piracy is worthwhile to them. So what we deal with is the after effects, the PTSD, because there is still a lot of that. It's great that they're being freed. Someone puts a press release saying we freed this crew. That point is when you really need to work with those people. We do suicide awareness training, we do mental health training, but a lot of it is signposting them to people who will actually help the victims of piracy. And the victims of piracy are not the P&I club who have paid out however much money. The victims are the guys that, even if it's 1 day, 2 days, if you're fearing for your life, it is an incredibly unpleasant thing. In my previous job, I covered some of the worst areas in the world. So again, I worked with people suffering from PTSD from Syria and Iraq and Nigeria with some of the attacks that were happening there. And it can take a long time, a really long time, but you need to say, this is what we have to do. And people often go, I'm fine. We had a horrific story of a seafarer, just slightly away from that, but during COVID, his child was born, his baby was born. 4 days later, the child passed away. There'd been complications in the birth. And his company said, we will get you home. We're going to do this. We can do it working with our chaplain. So we had our chaplain, Jake, was with him, who had been out shopping with him, buying presents for the baby as well. So we'd managed to do all of this. And the seafarer's gone, well, he came to the conclusion that he would have to do 2 weeks quarantine here, 2 weeks quarantine when he got home. And at that point, he would have missed the funeral. So he's taken the decision, well, I may as well continue with my contract. Now, and that in his head is, I'm going to do it. To our chaplain was, right, this is your choice, but we are flagging up on this. So the next port that guy goes to, the guy there knows to be checking on him, because these things take a lot of time. And people man up. They always use I'll man up or I'll bury it down. What we're doing is making sure that they are still being looked out for. And the piracy can hit someone 3 months later, 2 months later. And your treatment isn't particularly great. I mean, let's be honest, I mean, any kind of piracy, it doesn't matter what happens, it's not great. So the authorities are working on it, but it's a huge, huge problem that isn't going away anytime soon. And unfortunately, on that side of things, we are helping the crew members rather than trying to change policy. The Navy can deal with the policy. We'll deal with the aftermath, unfortunately. And cruise liners was the next one. I mean, what particular part of cruise liners? Because there's a lot there.
Well, I understand there's several posh cruise firms where the staff are very, very badly treated. Their onboard conditions, for instance, and their rates of pay and their work.
Yes, there was a brilliant press release last year from a couple of the cruise firms where they had repatriated their crew. They brought all their vessels together and said, right, you're from the Philippines, you can go on this one. You're from the US, you can go on this one. And it was a great press release. And they said, look, we fixed all of this so these guys can go closer to home. We're in contact with the crew. And what had actually happened was, so you're on one cruise ship, you're on another. They were swapped over, but were then put in the crew quarters of someone who had just left, who had been locked in there for 2-3 months. And they were going, so they had all these pristine guest suites were available. But they wanted to leave those because at that point it was, we need to make sure that we can get guests on board. No one knew it would go on so long. And eventually I think the crews pretty much near enough rebelled, I think it was in the end. Not going to say mutiny, but they refused because someone had been locked in a cabin for 3 months and they were told that's now your cabin and it hadn't been cleaned. And it was just not good enough. And so we were involved in working with the guys there, all the chaps off of the coast. You know, it's great. You've got a minimum crew. I think they had 20 crew on a couple of the Queen's ships, those big, big cruise liners. But that's like The Shining. I don't know if any of you've been in like an empty hotel or an empty ship. It's not nice just walking around because even when you do bump into someone, it will make you jump because you might not have seen somebody for 3 hours. So when they were coming in to pick up supplies, our chaplain was going on board. All of our ship visitors were timed in to go on board. So a lot of the firms know that they need to have a ship visitor. Some of the nicer ones obviously have somebody on all the time. We actually have ship visitors that will stay on the entire cruise and are there for the crew and the guests, but mainly for the crew because there's 3,000 of them or whatever. You never get to see them. We can be called on board anyway. If a crew member contacts us and says, so my phone is a great one. My phone is constantly on, much to my wife's annoyance. But we get text messages. And if I've got that message, that means that person needs somebody on there and we will just go on regardless. It doesn't always make us the most popular people in the world, but it does make us there for people. We get corporate donations. Corporates give us donations. But you do find that we don't get corporate donations from those that we call out. And they're other companies, you can call us out, not a problem, because they'll fix it. They're quite happy with that kind of thing. Ones that try and give you some money to look good for their press stuff very rarely come to us because we will very happily say that this ship has been the issue or this crew has been mistreated in this way. And you've got to make the industry start standing up for itself. The COVID caught them out in a lot of cases. Other times people just don't get paid great money. We've done a yacht project, the super yachts. The crews on a super yacht are coming into being some of the worst treated people. And the issue we found is that I'm a billionaire. I'm going to Madrid. So they're going, okay, we're going to go to Madrid. And then they go, do you know what? I really fancy going skiing. And they just divert the yacht away. Well, that crew member was supposed to be getting off in Madrid. And they're just, and it's also that kind of, well, you're just here to serve me. So we found those crews are actually one of the worst ones. Because even a cruise liner has staff facilities. A super yacht doesn't have staff facilities. You have 50 to 50, 60 crew on board. And they have literally just probably half the size of my office that I built for myself for COVID. So yeah, there's different degrees of it. But we are very happy to go on board. Some of the, as I say, bigger cruise firms will say, can you make sure you have somebody who is there for when we dock? Others will have somebody on board anyway. So Fred Olsen, for instance, used to have people on board. They're only restarting again now. We'll generally have a ship visitor, mental health champion on board as well. Plus they have our contact details everywhere. So they go, yeah, just contact them. We have 24-hour helplines.
Yeah.
I went on a cruise with Fred Olsen and I felt it was a happy crew. Very, very. They were absolutely wonderful. They were entertained, they were entertaining, they chatted to you to and fro. And now I'm thinking about it, I didn't see any signs that I noticed, maybe I wasn't looking, about support for the crew. Maybe it's just in their quarters, I don't know. But they were so caring to us. I would like to care for them. And I think it's right that Fred Olsen in their fees advertise the bit that you are giving as a donation, as a tip, if you like, to the crew. I was so relieved.
One of my best corporate meetings, I don't do corporate meetings generally. I only have a few firms that come to me, and there's a little sign behind me, a fixer of everything. You probably can't see it. If something's really bad, someone comes to me. So I don't generally deal with Fred Olsen, but I went on a meeting with them, and it was one of the best ones I've been on. They have a chap who was their first Filipino captain, which might not sound like a great deal, but there aren't many Filipino captains. And he had been there since he first stepped foot on a ship. And he had worked his way through every single rank there was until he got his own ship. There is no better advertisement for a firm than somebody who starts off as the lowliest of the low in the shipping terms and worked his way up for all of those years. And they truly do. I mean, Rachel, who doesn't work there anymore, I'm still in contact with her, just because it was such a great meeting to have someone so enthusiastic. And the idea is, if you're out and about, you're a guest on board, you shouldn't be seeing things about the crew members, because they're not supposed to be able to stop and take a picture of things. So there is lots of stuff in their crew quarters. In some of their ships, I've got 3 globes waiting to go back on where people can put their loose change in. Well, that's gone out the window now because nobody uses coins anymore. All crews are going to go. So guests could leave extra that would go to this support network, which is our support network, which the crews would rely on as well. They would contact us very quickly if there was an issue. So they knew that if someone had an issue but wasn't contacting us, that they would do it as well. To flag something up, you can't say this person's got, but you would say, can someone be around? And that's how we did it. So yeah, I'm glad you like the crews on there. They are, again, it's one of those ones where it's a little bit more hands-on approach from the ownership of the company, I think makes a big difference. It is very much top down. You've got some big companies. Shell, Graham Henderson, who is now one of our vice president, I think we've given him now. He wanted to work with us because he is a huge advocate for good mental health. And he's saying that it has to be led from his position. And he was head of global shipping or whatever long title he had. But he said if he didn't care about it, it wouldn't filter down. And for all the years he's been in it, he has been pushing to make sure those seafarers are looked after. And there is a lot of firms out there like that. But as you say, they're not the rarity anymore, but the other firms are the ones that cause the biggest issue. But there are companies like Fred Olsen, like Shell, that pay us money to do things, knowing that it's other seafarers from the less reputable companies that are actually being looked after. And they don't care. They're fine with that. That's what they want to do. And he's also a big advocate for the voting with your feet. As soon as the seafarers start seeing they are an actual valued commodity, then they will start getting the better contracts. These other tiny little places or ship owners that generally just use them to set off insurance money or whatever, that's when they'll start disappearing. I'm glad you had a Fred Olsen one. When I speak to him, we only ever really get good stuff back on that. But it is the size of the crews as well that matter, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. They told us the size of the crew, and it was about 300, and I think that's a reasonable size. It's like bit bigger than my school was, for instance, and so it feels quite. You can probably know almost everybody by sight, at least. And then one time, the ship's captain did a very funny thing. I saw that the ship was going on a parabola, and I thought, hey, why are we going back that way then? What's happened? Anyway, he soon announced that he'd got clearance from head office somewhere that since we'd passed the Arctic Circle, and at that particular time there was a lecture going on, and so a lot of people hadn't seen the Arctic Circle monument, well, he was going back and going past again. And he said, it's so lovely that my bosses give me permission to do that. So he was crediting up and they were crediting down.
It's different things where they have, I think, not to bang on about them too much, but I think they have one of the highest industry repeat bookings. And that will come from, it's all about money in the end, but if you treat your crew well, they will work well, they will do different things, and you say that the crew seem happy, because they are happy. It's impossible to hide whether you're happy or not, I'll be honest. Especially you're stuck on a ship with everybody being happy around you. If you think of the cruise liner actual staff, you're all having a great time and they're working a massively long shift. They can't hide they can't hide it if they're not happy. So you look after them properly, and it does pay dividends. And it's a lot of firms are starting to learn it, and it's not the best way. Yes, it would be nice if they want to be nice to their staff because they want to be nice to their staff and it's the right thing to do. Unfortunately, a lot of the time it's about bottom line. And we have to work that with them.
And Johnny, because I joined you late, can you tell me the name of your charity again, please?
Sorry, we're the Mission to Seafarers.
The Mission to Seafarers.
Yeah. Now we cover. Did you have something?
Well, I was going to say about a friend of mine who was based in Plymouth. She was working with the university there, and she was asked to help. She was a researcher. She was asked to help with research for a helpline. And the helpline was actually for land-based seafarers who were feeling very isolated. This was before COVID.
Yeah.
And she was proud. She was proud to do it.
We found there has been a huge issue with a lot of stuff we do, where loneliness and isolation affects everybody. A lot of our sort of Filipino work that we've started is, as a charity, as I said before, we're trying to work ourselves out of a job, but because our information comes from Seafarers, so the Seafarers Happiness Index, for instance, we found out most of the stress occurs just before these guys are going home, which made absolutely no sense until we found out that they were then coming home, and there's 15 to 20 people they're basically financially dependent. Yeah, they're looking after them. So that's when we developed the programs of working with the family to say, this is how you budget for a 9-month voyage, where you don't have to borrow money, you can earn this money. So the idea being, we're trying to fix these other problems we know arise. With the seafarers being more isolated and things, so you've finished a contract or you've retired, well, that brings its own issues. They haven't finished what work we do. So a lot of our seafarers, so at Tilbury, for instance, Barry is one of my, only because he's the closest. I don't have favorite volunteers, but Barry and I, we talk in much the same sort of language. He spent 30 years on, different seafaring vessels. He's the best person to go and talk to somebody, because the problems are the same. I said that earlier on. The problems are much the same, so they can talk to someone who knows what they're talking about. In Wales, our newest ship visitor there, the chaplain there, spent 20 years at sea. So again, just you finished on your actual crew, stuff. But there's people you can go and work for, and we're constantly crying out for people to come and work and do those kind of jobs, help those seafarers that they've already lived through that stuff. And so we do keep in contact with an awful lot of people. A lot of our supporters were former seafarers or families of, or there's a connection somewhere. And it is a case of our job doesn't finish just because we've gone, oh, that one's all right. or we've helped that abandoned crew. With the idea is stop it happening again, or with the stresses of going home, let's help people at home. Like the idea of educating the teenagers going into the colleges now.
Yeah.
It's about you will experience this, so you need to be ready for this, and you need to be looking out for other people, and we will then pay for you to do your course, which means you don't have 15 to 20 people with their hand out when you come home either. So it's a longer term plan of fixing a lot of these issues that are seafarer based, and having people involved who have done the job is one of our easiest ways of doing things. And around the world, the vast majority of our I think our ship visitors and chaplains, there's not, I don't even think it's half of the people are ordained. Most are just ship visitors who have done the job before, or have been in families who have done the job before, and they just want to help. And that's what the people need. And so it is involving the entire community around it.
Mary.
Just to tell everybody, if you can talk your way through the security at Junction 19 roundabout, there's a Mission to Seafarers facility at Portbury.
Portbury.
Yeah.
Yep, David.
Yeah, I was wondering if the new Starlink satellite network is going to make internet easier for seafarers.
It's what's allowed. It's a lot of the biggest firms are saying, right, we've got connectivity on board, but still, for instance, 25% I think don't have access to email on board. So we're still a long way off of going. So the ones that currently have it will just get it better. The ones who don't have it is of no effect to them at all. Which is, we spent 60,000 on what are called our MiFi units. So our chaplains, for want of a better phrase, became a wireless mast. And it was in their bag, and they would just talk to people and do it. But it should make things better. There are plans to make everything better, but the ones who just don't have it, it will not help them at all. Because again, it's connectivity. Your phone, if you're moving to different areas, you're never going to be able to keep a stable network until they do it. And as of yesterday, I think the satellite network, the global shipping satellite network, was actually hacked. So there's work to be done on pretty much everything, because that brings its own issues. The idea of educating seafarers who have had no internet access whilst on board about the dangers of bugs that get into your system is a whole new thing that people are starting to work out. And some shipping firms are saying, well, that's a good reason to not give them internet access. Well, it's not, is it? It just means you have to train people again. So that's what we're looking at. It seems strange that many ships do not have that option at all. The phone networks, we're currently trying to get a phone card that we work with that means they can update at any of our centres, and it is a global one rather than you have to have your European card. Currently we'll go with a big bag, and it's like, right, where are you going next? Oh, here's an American one. Here's so we're developing a global one with one of the network firms, and they can just pick it up from there. That is one of our biggest things they want. Straight away is, it's a new face. 5 minutes later, can I have some phone cards, please? And we'll just update all of their stuff for them. Any others?
Yes.
No. I've bored you all into stunned silence.
Au contraire, monsieur.
Absolutely.
I think it's been a
Phenomenal.
that word's gone from my mouth. Word daddy. But yes, it had been a very, very interesting and thought-provoking talk. Now, before we finish this meeting, is there anything, Johnny, that we can do for you?
The only thing I always ask for, and is a simple way of doing things, is tell somebody who wasn't here about what seafarers are doing. I am a community and ports fundraising manager. I think my title is. I should remember it. None of us ever remember it. But it's not the fundraising part is we're changing that. The idea is we need people to know what the Reliance is, to be those voices. I'm currently putting a package together for people to know, our existing supporters, tell their story, talk about those seafarers and look at it. It doesn't take long to look for that information. There's lots there, but people just don't know it. As I say, most know the Ever Given was a massive ship. They don't know how many people were on board and those guys didn't see their families and weren't paid. So tell someone, please. Sorry, two people.
Yeah, Johnny, we plan to make this, we've recorded this and we plan to make it available to Quakers on a mailing list. But is there anybody at this talk who would object to it being more widely available? If there is, let me know. Otherwise, I'll put it as public rather than limited access.
I'm fine with that.
Great, thank you.
I talk all the way across Europe, so but not so much last year. But I got home just before COVID lockdown last year, and next year I need to finish off. So I get to not see my children, but I took a crew out for a beer. To be honest, they had been away for a while, and we were discussing the fact that my son called me for bedtime and I said, "Oh, I haven't seen him for 4 days," and he's really upset because he was only 6 at the time. And the chap saying, "Yeah, it's terrible." He said, "I haven't seen my kids for 6 months." I was like, "Oh, okay, it's not a game of trumps, but I understand that." And it was that thing of going, "Wow, I am literally so lucky that I'm complaining of a few days." And they managed to get home just before. That was in Dunkirk. They were going home at that point, so they would have got home just before COVID lockdown as well. But yeah, so tell everybody. Sorry, Hattie, you've got.
Well, just about telling people, really. I'm sure that you've probably got a link, which is just, possibly a better link than the internet face that you have. And I don't know, but I think if I had a link sent to Patsy and sent out or something, I would commit to sending it to 5 people. I've just made a donation just now.
Thank you. If you tell people about this, I know for a fact, bearing in mind that half of my contacts on my phone are the seafarers who will be messengers. The weird things of where they ask for shoes or 50 Big Macs was my last one. We had to fight and sneak those in, which isn't healthy food. I hate Big Macs. But they hadn't had a Big Mac for 6 months. So, and they were eating pretty much rubbish at that stage. I think one of you mentioned earlier on about the crews not being able to communicate with each other necessarily because you're different languages as well. You need that cook. The problem you've got is the cook on board in some cases. Most powerful man on a ship. Most powerful person in my house. I've got 3 boys. The cultural food is where the issue comes in, and we find all of these things. And the guys have been fantastic. They're messaging, "I need to make this. I don't know what it is." So our guys will go and pick it up, and here is what it is. Because they can't also download recipes as well. So they've all come together. I think COVID has brought a lot of these guys together. They make Christmas cakes for each other. But the fact is that they want people to know. And people, we talk about it ourselves. And if you say, "Right, I've got this is what we have." Our fan magazine is probably the best one. I can send you a link to that. These are the stories that have happened. These are the guys that have done this. They read that goes out to seafarers as well. They see what else is happening. They always like it. I see Sunday services. They get involved in those constantly. They love being asked to be involved in it. But the fact is that they want people to know what they're doing, because literally in at the beginning of COVID, they brought in the supplies. They were still allowed shore leave at that point. But the UK, we love a bit of panic buying. They went to Asda and the shelves were empty for much the same stuff that they had just brought in to deliver 50 tons of, or whatever it was. And no one, even in a port city, didn't really know the difference of what these guys are doing. Most of your MPs, if an MP can't see the sea, I've worked with Westminster an awful lot, by the way. They don't think it affects them in any way, shape, or form. So talking to them about it. Okay. Sorry. Bye-bye. If you tell people about it, I'll send it. Patsy, I've got your email. I'll send the link to you.
Please, I'll send it round. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It has been great.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Wonderful.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.